If you'd like to win your fantasy football draft, you're in the right place. I spent 7 hours analyzing all 16 teams in the AFC, and these are the #1 values for each team. So as of right now, Isaiah McKenzie is actually winning the slot role in Bills minicamp. And if you were to look at these two numbers right here, this is Jamison Crowder's salary, and then this is Isaiah McKenzie's. So McKenzie's is only 5% less than the new addition, the veteran, in Crowder, meaning that money isn't going to be the deciding factor here. Talent will. But now check this out. McKenzie is currently taken outside the top 85 wide receivers. He goes 89th overall after a guy in Odell who might not even play this year. But meanwhile, Josh Allen's previous slot receiver the last 3 years in Cole Beasley has averaged a top 36 finish. And if we were to look at the last 2 times that Isaiah McKenzie got to be a starting wide receiver for Josh Allen these last few years, he scored 29.4 points, the 4th highest on the week, and then 30.5 points. He had 190 yards and 3 touchdowns the last 2 times he was a starter since 2020. So if he indeed secures that role, you're going to want him, and you're also going to want this 10th round running back. Because Chase Edmonds right now, this $5.5 million salary that he got from the Dolphins, he was the first running back selected in free agency, by the way, meaning that teams wanted him and he got bid up. Yes, he is now a top 7% paid running back, and he earns 2 times more than any other back on the roster. And now Edmonds' main competition is Raheem Mostert. But Mostert is aging, he's approaching 30, and he's missed 73% of his games the last 2 years. But that's not all, because here's last year's backfield efficiency rates for the current Miami backfield. Chase Edmonds, 7th overall in the league. Fantastic. Sony Michel, though, 45th, and Myles Gaskin, 52nd. Of course, Mostert didn't play last year because he was hurt. So Edmonds goes far too late for the talent and opportunity, but this next wide receiver goes even later. Jacoby Myers goes as the 61st wide receiver off the board, even though he finished as a top 36 wide receiver last year. And he was extremely unlucky. Let me explain. You see, the average top 36 wide receiver sees around a 6% touchdown rate. And Myers, who was top 36 last year, saw just a 2.4% touchdown rate, less than half the usual. So given the targets that he saw last year, 120, he was actually expected to score 7 touchdowns and finish as a top 15 wide receiver, yet he only scored 2. Very unlucky. But he's not the only late round wide receiver you want, and that's because rookie Garrett Wilson currently goes outside the top 50 wide receivers taken, even though he was a top 10 draft pick. This is important because top 10 NFL draft picks finish on average 29th overall at the wide receiver position, and this dude was earning targets in a loaded wide receiver room. He saw an elite 26% target share while playing with first-round pick Chris Olave, first-round pick Jameson Williams, who did play at Ohio State before transferring because he couldn't get on the field, and then future first-round pick and potentially top 10 pick Jackson Smith-Njigba. So Wilson goes outside the top 50 wide receivers, and this next guy goes outside the top 50 running backs. So Gus Edwards is currently on track to return for week 1, which is great news. However, his teammate J.K. Dobbins is trending to miss time, and head coach John Harbaugh recently stated that he might go on the PUP list, which means he at least has to miss 4 games. So Edwards is a great value, and so is this 18th round pick, because Chris Evans, according to beat reporters in Cincinnati, is winning the running back 2 job ahead of Samaje Perine. And if we look at burst and agility, which is very important, maybe the most important thing for a running back, he is top 10%, almost top 5% of all time in each category. He's a fantastic athlete, and he earned 7.1 yards per touch last year. Here's what this means. On his small sample of 32 touches, he would have led the NFL in running back efficiency. He was great. Plus, the 2 times that he actually saw meaningful snaps and operated as the running back 2, week 6 against Detroit, he plays 38% of the snaps, and if you scroll over here, he scored 15.7 fantasy points, a top 20 back. And then in week 18, when they were resting some starters, he actually played the majority of the snaps, 55% of the snaps, and that week he puts up 15.9 points, again, a top 20 running back. He ended up paying off when he got the opportunity. And now this is important because Joe Mixon has missed time in 80% of his seasons, 4 out of 5 so far. Now Evans isn't the only 18th round value you want, because since the beginning of 2020, Donovan Peoples-Jones is 2nd in yards per reception amongst wide receivers, and if you take out Deshaun Jackson's small sample, he's 2nd behind only Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And now there's increased belief that Deshaun Watson will play this year. The NFL, who was expected to give him a year suspension, offered him a 12-game suspension, and now he can actually negotiate that. So Peoples-Jones is an absolute slam dunk value because he goes outside the top 95 wide receivers, even though he's the wide receiver 2 on his team. Now let's take a look at who the most valuable rookie wide receiver is. And this man's name is George Pickens, who slid in drafts because of his injury, would have been a first-round pick. And the Steelers, there's a quote here that says, coming out of last year with the early draft prep, we thought he was the best wide receiver in the draft, and they got him in the 2nd round. And now Pittsburgh has to replace 25% of their targets from last year, most notably from guys like James Washington and Juju Smith-Schuster leaving. So grab Pickens, who might push for the wide receiver 2 job, and consider this next guy in round 5 a must. And that man's name is Brandon Cooks, who averaged 9.6 targets per game last year with Davis Mills, which was more than Tyreek Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs, guys who consistently go as top 10 wide receivers. And Cook's 15.4 points per game with Davis Mills was the exact same combination that Jamar Chase scored with Joe Burrow last year. And Jamar Chase goes as the top 3 wide receiver in most drafts, meanwhile Brandon Cooks goes as the 25th guy off the board. Get him. Now this next wide receiver goes 10 rounds later than Cooks. And that man's name is Paris Campbell, who is currently operating as a starting wide receiver, the number 2 wide receiver on the Colts. Here's the quote from The Athletic in terms of the Colts minicamp. Paris Campbell, he ran exclusively with the first team offense and was featured extensively. Now, despite this, in drafts, Campbell is still going 10 picks after the second round rookie Alec Pierce, who is currently a backup. Campbell is definitely going to rise, so grab him as the wide receiver 76 while you can, and grab this next guy who surprisingly goes 36 picks later. And honestly, he often goes undrafted, Zay Jones. Even though he was a top 25 receiver, the 21st best wide receiver, the final 5 weeks of last year, around guys like Keenan Allen, Deontay Johnson, and Brandon Cooks. And his success was rewarded with a top 30 wide receiver salary. There's only 32 teams in the NFL, and he's paid now in the top 30, earning $8 million per year. This means that Jacksonville is incentivized to start him. You're not going to pay a guy top 30 money and bench him. But that's not all. Because Trevor Lawrence targeted wide receivers last year 65% of the time, which was the 3rd highest rate in the NFL. And like Jones, this next running back also goes undrafted in fantasy. And his name is Dontrell Hilliard. Now stick with me here, because Hilliard on his sample last year was the most efficient running back on the ground, true yards per carry in the NFL, with 5.5 per attempt. And Tennessee enjoyed him so much that they re-signed him this past off season. And now, according to Tennessee beat writers, Hilliard is actually taking the running back 2 snaps ahead of rookie Hassan Haskins, but he goes 25 plus spots later than him in fantasy drafts. This is where it pays just to pay attention. A lot of people assume the rookie is the running back 2. Right now, that's not the case. So Hilliard is a value late, but so is this mid-round running back. Melvin Gordon has basically been a top 20 running back in back-to-back seasons. And he was top 15 in both carries on the ground and total running back opportunities last year. He was being fed. And yes, Javonte Williams, the young stud, is there, but Javonte Williams out of his own mouth said they're going to continue to have the same role as last year, where Gordon finished top 20, but now he goes 35th overall in drafts, which is right around guys like James Cook, who I have projected for half as many touches. Now, according to my top 200, Melvin Gordon, I have him 39 spots ahead of the consensus. I believe that he's worth drafting 3 or 4 rounds earlier. And if you want that top 200, my tiers, my rankings, a whole bunch more in the Supreme cheat sheet, plus I'll throw in a $20 Amazon gift card. You could secure it by clicking the link in the description and following the 2 simple steps. And if for some reason you don't like the cheat sheet, I'll 100% refund you the $10 and you can keep the $20 gift card. It's on the house. Check the link in the description to learn more. Now, Gordon isn't the only mid-round value that you want, because Patrick Mahomes' average starting running back averages 14.8 points per game, which is more than all of these guys averaged last year. Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, DeAndre Swift, Ezekiel Elliott, Aaron Jones, all these guys were top 15 backs. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the most talented running back in Kansas City and the starter there. Ronald Jones might get some offseason hype, and I believe that he's going to be a value, but it's Ronald Jones' backfield. Yet Jones currently goes outside the top 20 running backs as the 27th overall back. And speaking of guys who go outside the top 20 running backs, check out this dude. Josh Jacobs has the 5th most yards since he entered the league in 2019. Look at the company he's in. Ezekiel Elliott, Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, and Derrick Henry, the only guys who have been more productive. And Jacobs' 4.3 targets per game last year were more than guys like Saquon Barkley, and over the second half of the year, he averaged more than DeAndre Swift. And now Devontae Adams joins the team. And this is important because Green Bay averaged 17% more rushing touchdowns when Adams was out there. And here's why this matters. Because Josh Jacobs has been top 10 in red zone attempts since he's entered the league. And with Adams there, you could assume more red zone plays are going to be run, and the more red zone plays that are ran correlates with more touchdowns for Josh Jacobs. And speaking of touchdowns, check out this next wide receiver value. Because Josh Palmer started 3 of the final 5 games for the Chargers last year. In all 3 of those games, he scored a touchdown and went over 14 fantasy points, which is similar or more points as all of these wide receivers: Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs average per game. Of course, Palmer isn't going to score a touchdown every game, but when he was out there, he was highly productive. And now the second-year player is expected to start in 2022. Now, these were the best values in the AFC, but none of them were tight ends. If you want to know the only 7 tight ends that should be on your radar, then check out this video right here. And keep a very close eye on the 4th tight end I talk about in that video.